You know, we often see World War II as this very clear story, right? A straightforward battle of good versus evil. But what if I told you that for the first 2 years of that war, two of the absolute biggest players were in fact partners? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on a chapter of the war that gets overlooked a lot, but is absolutely critical to understanding how the whole thing unfolded.
In the most difficult time of the war, our people were alone. This is the modern story we hear. It's this powerful, heroic image of the Soviet Union standing as the lone fortress against the Nazi war machine, right from the very beginning.
But is that really what happened? When you actually dig into the documents, the speeches, the official statements from that time, well, the story they tell is something else entirely.
So, let's start with the propaganda. What exactly were the Soviet leaders and their state-run media telling their own citizens in the lead-up to the German invasion in June of 1941?
The message wasn't, hey, get ready to fight fascism. Not at all. The official line was that this war was just a petty squabble between greedy capitalist empires, and the Soviet Union, thanks to its brilliant leadership, was staying out of it, enjoying peace.
Okay, and this is where it gets really wild. The very idea of fighting a war to destroy Hitlerism was officially labeled as not only senseless, but also criminal. And this wasn't some minor official's opinion. This was the head of the Soviet government broadcasting this to the entire world. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some policy cooked up by a committee. This whole narrative, this entire way of framing the war, it came directly from the top, from Joseph Stalin himself.
I mean, just think about that for a second. This is a complete flip of the history we all know. Stalin personally goes on the record saying that Germany was the victim, that France and England attacked them, and that the Soviet Union was backing Germany's so-called peace proposals. This was the reality presented to the Soviet people.
But okay, words are one thing. This partnership went way beyond propaganda. It was forged in steel and oil, cemented by a massive economic and military cooperation that would change the course of the war. Listen to this. In a meeting with Germany's top diplomat, Stalin makes a direct promise. If Germany gets into a tight spot, the Soviet people will come to Germany's aid. You can't get much clearer than that. This was a deep, strategic alliance in the making.
Now, a lot of the focus at the time was on what the USSR was sending to Germany, vital stuff like grain and oil. And yeah, that was important. But the real story, the part that was a total game changer, was what Germany was sending back. And just to give you a sense of scale here, the aid the Allies later sent to the USSR during the war was worth at least 30 times more than all the raw materials the Soviets traded with Germany. So this deal was never just about resources.
So what was really going on? Simple. Hitler wasn't just paying for oil. He was trading away Germany's most secret, most advanced military technology, literally the crown jewels of his war machine.
And just look at this list. It's staggering. We're not talking about last year's models. This was the latest and greatest German tech. They got samples of their best fighter planes, blueprints for the battleship Bismarck, advanced artillery, the whole shebang. This kicked off a massive, state-sponsored effort to reverse engineer everything and completely upgrade the Red Army.
And that brings us to the most brutal, the most direct act of this partnership, the coordinated invasion and destruction of Poland in September 1939.
Picture this. It's September 17th. The Polish army is already fighting for its very existence against the German invasion from the west. And then, the Red Army pours across the eastern border. The Poles had a handful of border guards there. They were met by over 2 million Soviet soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and almost 4,000 aircraft. It was a completely impossible situation. And just to make sure nobody got the wrong idea about what was happening, the two invading powers put out a joint public statement, making it perfectly clear this was a coordinated move.
See the language they used? This wasn't an invasion. Oh no. It was a mission to restore order in a country that had supposedly collapsed. But the message between the lines was crystal clear. We're in this together and our goals are aligned.
And then comes this. In a personal telegram, Stalin himself gives this partnership its chilling, infamous name, a friendship sealed with blood. And let's be very clear, the blood he was referring to was Polish blood.
So this brings us back to that big question. Why? Why would Hitler, who is obsessed with his military secrets, be so generous? Well, as we've seen, he wasn't buying oil. He was buying something far, far more valuable. What Hitler bought was strategic neutrality. By making a deal with the Soviets, he eliminated the threat of a two-front war. That was Germany's absolute nightmare in World War I. This pact took the Soviet Union completely off the board, freeing Hitler up to throw the entire might of his military west to conquer France in 1940.
And believe me, the Allies knew exactly what this meant. This dispatch from the Soviet ambassador in Paris says it all. Their biggest fear, their cares and anxieties, was whether the Soviets would actively back Germany. They knew this wasn't passive neutrality. It was the one move that tilted the entire balance of power in Europe straight to Hitler.
But there's always a price, isn't there? The bill for this partnership, bought with Polish land and German technology, was about to come due. And the price, when Hitler finally turned on his partner in 1941, would be beyond devastating.
Just look at these numbers. They tell a terrifying story. In 1939, conquering Poland cost the German army over 16,000 casualties. 2 years later, in just the first 10 days of invading the USSR, while annihilating a much larger, better-equipped Soviet force, they lost less than a third of that. The strategic advantage Hitler bought in 1939 paid off with horrifying efficiency in 1941.
And all of this forces us to ask a really difficult question. That friendship was sealed in blood, yes, in Polish blood. But what was the true cost, paid just 2 years later in Soviet blood? When you look at the catastrophe of 1941, you have to reconsider the real price of that early partnership and what it ultimately cost the Soviet people.